Yeah, I see I believe it's the second or third chapter in the book here, the Saving the Vote, where you ran for supervisor of elections. Now, that was
Yes, I
after you were out of the military.
No.
Is that right or no?
No. In 2000, we had the election here in Florida, and it basically came down to 500 and some votes that determined the outcome of really the entire the presidency for our country. And right after that, I saw this big rush to fix the problem of the dangling chads by throwing money at it and buying touchscreen voting machines. And I was in IT security, network administration, and I looked at these touchscreen voting machines that we were paying like $7,000 a piece for in Pasco County, looking at a $7 million budget on them to fix a problem. I didn't think these were going to fix the problem. They didn't leave a paper trail. They were really expensive. They were vulnerable to hacking, and I proved that along with I provided white papers on some of the vulnerabilities. I made a video where I drove to Fort Myers after the hurricane and made a video. You got to watch it. It's actually pretty funny.
It did.
Bad. And videotaped all the touchscreen voting machines sitting there after Hurricane Charlie went through because they didn't have any power. I titled that "No Power to Vote." So basically you could alter the outcome of election with a BB gun if you went around to a specific precincts and shot out the transformers, right? I mean, there's stupid little things.
I remember in that video you were asking them about the life of the batteries and things like that.
Yeah, wow, how is this going to impact everything? Because with the touchscreen voting machines, you have to have like a bunch of them in each precinct, 20, 25, 50 of them, depending on the precinct size. Whereas with the optical scanning systems, you only needed one or two for redundancy in each precinct, and they were about $5,000 a piece. They weren't nearly as much. Mm-hmm. And they allowed for a paper trail. So I'm like, that's what people want. Take that extra money you want, spend it on laptops for our kids in schools, right? Why are you guys so... I got ticked off watching that, and I decided to get involved. So I stood out in front of Publix with my daughters, collected 2,312 petitions, got my name on the ballot here in Pasco County for election supervisor, running with no political affiliation. The second I went down and submitted my intent to run with no political affiliation, I was contacted by the Democrats, of which I probably agreed with on social issues more than I did as a conservative. But the head of the DNC down here in Pasco County, I think LaVon Miller was her name, she called me up and told me basically, run with us or we're going to oppose you. And I'm like, well, if you oppose me, you're basically giving the election to the Republicans. That's your plan? And she was fine with that, right? It's like either do this, and again, the Democrats have kept that philosophy of throw the baby out with the bathwater, win at all costs. She was prepared, instead of supporting me, because they knew that they would never win if they ran a Democrat with me running, because I would take a lot of their vote and the Republican would win. So their only really reasonable hope would be to support me, which most of the Democrats did. But the head of the DNC, whose daughter was also at the head of the DCCC, which had all the funding and the money, had this control over the Democratic Party here in Pasco County. I learned all of this having like Trump, right? I was sort of like an early Trump. I had no background in politics whatsoever. I didn't have $1 billion. I had tax money coming back to me that my wife wanted to use to remodel our bathroom, but I spent on an election instead. That went over really well. But should I mention that this is my ex-wife?
Yes.
That didn't end it, but it didn't help it much at all either. So I run for office, no political affiliation. I'm trying
supervisor of elections, right?
Supervisor of elections. He had my opponent, Kurt Browning, had just switched from being a Democrat for like 24 years. Midterm as a Democrat, he switches to the Republican Party. That was the same year that the majority of registered voters in Pasco County switched from Democrat to Republican. Coincidence, huh?
Yeah.
I looked at that as being a complete violation of the trust that you have in the person who counts the votes. You couldn't do a more partisan act, and I thought that the person who counted the votes should have no political affiliation. So I told her to pound sand, that I wasn't going to run as a Democrat, and that ended up not helping me much right there. Learned politically real quick. I have no idea why, but TV stations, nobody would give me any airtime. St. Pete Times, Tampa Tribune did a few things. I had fun with that, but for the most part, I was on my own. I was doing protests of one, trying to do anything I could to stop this. Basically, with a position of optical scanners are good, touchscreens are bad. So I lose. I got 18% of the vote. Not too bad for running with no political affiliation.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. And then it turns out. The guy that I ran against, whose entire platform was the touchscreen voting machines, for which he purchased and did all of that. So he wins. A couple months later, he's tapped by Christ, who had just won as governor, to be Florida's Secretary of State. And then, as Secretary of State, he turns around, bans touchscreen voting machines, which were the systems that he ran, the platform he ran on was how good those were. He called me the worst thing, said I was crazy, didn't know what I was talking about, lunatic. Said, the same things they did to Trump. And just bashed the hell out of me. Then he gets into office, and then he bans touchscreen voting machines in favor of the optical scanning ones, which I had ran my entire platform with. A couple months after that, they're deciding what to do with them. The people we bought them from, like ES&S, apparently offered to buy him these $7,000 piece of machines back from Browning for like $1 a piece. He got offended by that, according to an article that the Times, I think, wrote. He was offended by that. So instead they ended up basically parting them, taking out hard drives and stuff they could sell for pennies on the dollar, and the stuff they couldn't sell, just throwing them into a shredder in Tampa and turning them into recycling material. So if ever a person ran trying to make a point, trying to get someone to listen, and in the end sort of stood back and said, I told you so, that would definitely be me. Although I told you so doesn't even really seem to fill the bill, does it? It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
They shredded, according to the media reports with like the Tampa Tribune, they shredded $35 million worth of these machines in recycling centers that were still owed. They still owed $35 million on. So they're shredding these machines that the counties are still paying for.
It's ridiculous.
Apparently, a lot of the machines got sold to other countries. I can only picture like this Venezuelan dictator going, I'll take those. You work you guys trusted him so much. Let me just update the BIOS here, and we'll have our elections all nice and no paper trail.